From 1939 to 1945, in the air over Europe and the Pacific, warring nations engaged in a deadly race to rule the skies. In air war, the fates of men and nations depend as much upon the powers of their machines as on the courage and skill of the men who fly them. Once committed to battle, a technical problem left unsolved months or even years before by aeronautical designers can mean death and destruction to even the bravest and most experienced flyer. Air combat in World War II was a battle that began on the drawing boards. It was a battle of imagination and vision, waged by engineers and designers in labs and machine shops, in death-defying test flights, in the arena of international competition, and on the production line. Lives hung in the balance, and in the crucible of a modern air war, the clock was always ticking. Summer 1940. The Luftwaffe is poised at the English Channel, its eyes on Britain. The Empire of Japan casts hungry eyes on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, and the whole world teeters on the brink of total war. The combat use of aircraft evolved during the First World War from simple reconnaissance of enemy positions to aerial bombardment and airborne combat. But with the advent of the dogfight, whomever's plane could dive faster, climb quicker, turn more sharply, stay aloft longer, support heavier and more accurate armament, held the advantage. And such technical advantages often spelled the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. 1918. The war to end all wars is over. The aces and aviators who survive are mustered out. Those who remain in the skeletal air forces become unwanted stepchildren of their nation's armies and navies. But the quest for supremacy in the air didn't end with the armistice. The pilots, addicted to flight, apply their aerial acrobatic skills to barnstorming. Others turn to commercial aviation. Air races multiply and reach a fever pitch. These races are tests of speed and endurance, exhibitions of national pride and the development of powerful new aircraft. Yet these races will soon become the testing ground for aircraft which will have to form the backbone of a new Allied force to counter the threat of growing Axis armadas. The Schneider Trophy Air Race for seaplanes, begun in 1919, is quickly established as one of the world's most important international competitions. In 1929, Britain wins the Schneider Cup with an experimental all-metal monoplane, the Supermarine S-6. This aircraft is the creation of R.J. Mitchell, chief aviation designer for the Supermarine Works at Southampton. Designing and building aircraft for the race, however, is expensive. Sir Hugh Trenchard, Chief of the Royal Air Force, concerned with England's defense capabilities, pushes the Treasury to fund Mitchell's projects. But in 1930, a disarmament-conscious Labour government rules the Schneider Trophy race a sporting event, not to be supported by public funds. To Mitchell and the RAF command, all seems lost, until Lady Fanny Houston, a wealthy and outspoken patriot and suffragette, steps forth and offers the then prodigious sum of £100,000 to sustain the British effort. Saved by Lady Houston's gift, Mitchell's 1931 model, with its distinctive elliptical wing, designed to reduce drag and increase speed, sets a new world airspeed record of 407 miles per hour. This is 200 miles per hour faster than the RAF's then best fighter, the Hawker Fury. 1933. Trenchard and others in the Air Ministry, troubled by the rise of Nazism and a new belligerence in Germany, suspect that Germany's state-owned civilian airline, Lufthansa, is in fact a cover for an emerging secret air force. When Hitler appoints a veteran World War I aviator named Hermann Goering as the new Minister of Civil Aviation, the British now fear that the real goal of the reborn German aviation industry is offensive air power. At the Bayer Air Works is the gifted designer Professor Willy Messerschmitt. And at Focke-Wulf, Professor Kurt Tonk has assembled a team of top flight engineers. Their intentions seem anything but peaceful. To replace the Fury, the British Air Ministry returns to Hawker to give them a single-seat, high-speed monoplane fighter. The Air Ministers also see in Mitchell's high-speed, high-performance seaplanes the seeds of an RAF fighter to rival the next-generation Hawker. Mitchell, a man of few words, reserves his eloquence for the drafting table. He replaces the pontoon floats of his seaplane with wide-carriage retractable landing gear. He encloses the cockpit and refines his already sleek metal-skin fuselage and elliptical wing. Both Hawker and Supermarine designed their new planes in anticipation of an engine more efficient and more powerful than anything the British have built before. Designated the Rolls-Royce 1200 Merlin, Sir Henry Royce promises delivery by mid-1934. That same summer, Goering orders Willy Messerschmitt to design a single-seat interceptor fighter, utilizing the smallest possible airframe with the most powerful engine available. Messerschmitt's prototype uses the Rolls-Royce Kestrel, the best engine then available on the open market. October 1936. At the now infamous Berlin Olympic Games, in a roaring pass over the Olympic complex, the Allies are unpleasantly surprised as the fruit of Messerschmitt's genius is finally revealed: the Me-109. 2 weeks later, the RAF debuts its new Hawker Hurricane. Then, less than 6 months later, Supermarine's long-awaited answer to the Me-109 takes off from Hampshire on the maiden flight of Mitchell's graceful bird of prey, the Spitfire. Both Spitfire and Hurricane use the new Merlin engine. Convinced that in the face of the growing Nazi buildup, the Air Ministry will soon be placing big orders for Hurricane fighters, Hawker decides to go ahead with mass production of the Hurricane. The gamble pays off. 3 months later, the government places its first order for 600 planes. On the same day, the government also orders 310 Spitfires from Supermarine. With the Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg gearing up for production of the Me-109, comparisons between British and German fighters are inevitable. Hitler, now openly flaunting his growing power, trumpets the superiority of the 109. Goering, now commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, sends an Me-109 demonstration team to the 1937 International Flying Meet in Zurich. The Allies are stunned as the Messerschmitt dominates the field of military aircraft in both the speed and dive and climb competitions. The reality of new German air power is sobering. The race immediately intensifies. Supermarine begins modifying the Spitfire to improve its performance. At Hawker, the Hurricane is given a new engine and armament. But the Me-109 is fitted with a new direct fuel injection engine and a variable pitch propeller. New cannons give it a heavier punch than the Spitfire and Hurricane. As each side now works to improve its fighters, the other side matches and parries. But unlike the air races of the early 30s, the world begins to fear this is a race whose winner will be decided in the skies, in air-to-air combat. Dawn, September 1st, 1939. The Luftwaffe streaks into Poland, destroying the Polish Air Force on the ground. The mechanized ground forces of the Reich thunder across the border. In 18 days, Poland falls. For the first time, air power has been used to strike the first blow with devastating effect. The world is shocked at the blinding speed with which Germany conquers Holland, Belgium, Scandinavia, and France. The weaknesses of British aircraft become brutally obvious when, in defending their French allies, over half the RAF's fighters are lost. July 16th, 1940. His aggression now naked to the world. Hitler is furious that England will not surrender. He decides to invade. Before launching Operation Sea Lion, the Luftwaffe will soften British defenses in a massive assault from the air. In previous combat over Europe, when Spitfires and Hurricanes tried to pursue the Messerschmitt fighters above 20,000 feet, they performed poorly. And worse, British intelligence estimates that the Luftwaffe outnumber its aircraft somewhere between 3 or 5 to 1. The Luftwaffe's fighters, proven in the Spanish Civil War and all across Europe, are on the whole technically superior to anything in the RAF arsenal. Britain, however, has one technical advantage. Robert Watson Watt, a meteorological scientist, has perfected a radio detecting and ranging system, radar. By mid-1940, a chain of early warning radar stations are in place from the Isle of Wight on the Channel coast to the River Tees on the North Sea. Enemy aircraft can be detected at 100 miles. British fighters do not need to patrol. They can remain on the ground, conserving fuel, and take to the skies at the last possible moment. The British brace for attack. Intelligence indicates over 3,500 warplanes poised at bases all over Europe. England has thousands of aircraft on order or in production, but the RAF has only 700 fighters with which to defend its skies. Then, on the night of June 5th, 30 German bombers stage a small raid on coastal airfields. The British prepare for the worst. Yet for no apparent reason, Hitler hesitates, giving the British precious time to continue making last-minute modifications. If anything can be done to improve the RAF fighter, now is the time. The Hurricane and Spitfire are not up to the standards of the Me-109 with its variable pitch propeller. In close pursuit at high altitudes, the difference in performance could prove fatal to RAF pilots. A single Spitfire is converted to a variable pitch propeller. The results are stunning. 7,000 feet are added to its ceiling. The Spitfire can now maneuver better at high altitudes, take off even more quickly, and climb steeply. Without waiting for approval from the Air Ministry, Sir Hugh Dowding, Chief of Fighter Command, orders every fighter in the RAF converted. Within a month, the job is done. August 13th, 1940. The German High Command calls it Eagle's Day. Its mission? To wipe out the RAF on the ground and in the air while smashing Britain's network of early warning radar and crippling its aircraft production facilities. But Eagle's Day is not the success the Luftwaffe hoped for. The improved Spitfires and Hurricanes attack out of the sun. Avoiding the Messerschmitt fighter escorts, they take out Stuka dive bombers and Junkers 88 medium bombers with their wing-mounted guns. August 15th, 1100 hours. Radar screens in Kent light up. Huge formations of German aircraft are gathering over Calais across the Channel. 30 minutes later, Stuka dive bombers with their Me-109 escorts pass the cliffs of Dover. Further north, 3 large enemy formations pour in from the North Sea. Almost simultaneously, a fleet of unescorted Junkers 88s from Denmark make landfall in North Anglia. The Battle of Britain is on. The backbone of the Luftwaffe is its Junkers Ju-88, a medium bomber with the speed of a fighter. But the German bombers reveal one fatal design flaw. They lack tail guns. When Spitfires and Hurricanes attack from behind, the bombers are vulnerable. However, during radical maneuvers, The carburetor-fed engines of the Spitfires and Hurricanes sputter or cut out. The fuel-injected Messerschmitts do not. In high-altitude, tight combat, the Messerschmitts generally prevail. But the Me-109's cruising range is limited. After the long approach to England, they can either stay close to the bombers or pursue the British fighters. They can't do both. Unwilling to sacrifice his precious bombers, Goering makes a major mistake. He orders his Messerschmitts to stay close to the bombers. By yielding combat at higher altitudes, the Messerschmitt surrenders its technical advantage. On the ground, the Messerschmitt is paying the price of a major flaw in design. Because of its ill-conceived narrow undercarriage, the Me-109 tends to ground loop on takeoff and landing. Even for the most experienced pilots, the plane is hard to control coming in or going out. Within the first 2 years of the war, 1,500 fighters are lost or damaged in runway accidents. The British defense, however, is not without its price. In planes, material, and in pilots. However, the effect of the losses is tempered by a key design element of the Hurricane. As the RAF loses more and more of its most experienced pilots, green pilots and volunteers from other Allied nations are plugged in. But the Hurricane's wide track carriage, in contrast to the 109's narrow gear, proves forgiving at landings by inexperienced or even injured pilots. Precious lives and planes are saved. The air war's balance starts to shift. The Luftwaffe, driven from its military targets by the British fighters, turns the fury of its assault on the city of London itself. Night and day, they rain bombs on the city and its citizens. With every wave, the still outnumbered RAF fighters rise to the challenge. With valiant effort and superior strategy, the British continue to hold their own against the Luftwaffe. Finally, on September 17th, Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. After 3 brutal months, the Luftwaffe has lost 1,733 aircraft against the RAF's 915. In frustration, the Nazis began relentlessly bombing London in night attacks. It will become known as the Blitz. After 8 months, on May 10th, 1941, the Luftwaffe makes one last raid. From 9:30 in the evening to 5 a.m. the next morning, 507 Luftwaffe warplanes swarm over London, blasting it with explosives and incendiaries. The Battle of Britain is over, but the war has barely begun. (1941). Tension mounts in the Pacific. War between the United States and the Empire of Japan could break out at any moment. On Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, it does. Suddenly, violently, destructively. After Pearl Harbor, the United States has only 75 medium bombers, 45 fighters, and 10 heavy bombers left to protect its west coast. The planes have almost no bombs, no ammunition, spare parts, or other essential equipment. Supplies on the East Coast are even harder to come by. Japan, after nearly a decade of war on the Asian mainland, is seasoned, aggressive, well-equipped, and seemingly invincible. The mystique of the Japanese war machine resides in one plane, the Mitsubishi Zero. Four years earlier, in 1937, with Japanese bombers penetrating deeper and deeper into China, the Imperial Navy desperately needs a new fighter with long-range, high maneuverability and exceptional speed. Using a new lightweight aluminum alloy developed in Japan, the tubular frame Zero's design more than satisfies the commanders. Mitsubishi begins producing these lightweight fighters in staggering numbers. To the Japanese, the Zero is everything that the Spitfire is to the British. The Zero is also the first carrier-based fighter capable of beating land-based opponents. Confronting the Zero is the United States Navy and Marine Corps' Grumman Wildcat. With its thick skin and heavy armament, designed with an eye to protecting the pilot, the Wildcat is slower, heavier, and far less maneuverable than the Zero. While the Zero seems almost mythic in its abilities, the plane is also a pilot's death trap. Lacking protective armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, the Zero sacrifices pilot safety for speed and range. The Americans know almost nothing about it except that it's deadly and seemingly everywhere at once. America's luck changes the following summer when a crashed Zero is found practically intact in the Aleutian Islands. Quickly shipped back to the States, it's exhaustively tested. Its strengths and weaknesses are carefully analyzed by Leroy Grumman and Jake Swerble at Grumman Aircraft. The tests provide a clear-cut profile of the kind of plane the United States will need to match the Zero in the air. And that plane is already nearing completion at Grumman. By mid-1942, within weeks of the Battle of Midway, Grumman and Swerble are ready to test their new fighter. But Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, one of the Navy's authorities on air combat tactics, insists that even more climb and speed are needed to counter the Zero. A new, more powerful Pratt & Whitney 18-cylinder engine is installed. Finally, American flyers have something to counter the Zero. The Navy calls it the Hellcat. By the end of 1943, over 2,500 Hellcat fighters are delivered to the fleet. While still unable to stick with the Zero in tight turns, the Hellcat speed and heavier armament take their toll on the flammable Zeros as the Allied offensive in the Pacific builds momentum. June 1944. The Navy needs to draw the Japanese fleet into a decisive battle. Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet and Admiral Toyoda's combined fleet converge on the Philippine Sea near the Marianas Islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. Toyoda flatly states, the fate of the empire rests on this one battle. The Americans brace for a massive air assault from a Japanese fleet which boasts 6 carriers loaded with Zeros. On the morning of the 19th, the Battle of the Philippine Sea begins. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasho and his squadron of F-6 Hellcats scramble from the carrier Lexington. Climbing, Vrasho spots 60 Japanese aircraft approaching, aimed at the heart of the American fleet. He dives down onto the Japanese formation, his guns roaring. By day's end, Vrasho personally counts 6 airborne kills, becoming an ace in a single day's fighting. By the battle's end, Task Force 58 and their F-6 Hellcats have shot down nearly 400 Japanese fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. The seemingly invincible Zero, which once ruled the skies over the Pacific, has finally met its match in the F-6 Hellcat. So lopsided is the American victory that day that the air battle is dubbed the Marianas Turkey Shoot. In 1943, in the European theater, the American 8th Air Force, based in Britain, begins daylight precision bombing of strategic targets. Their B-17 flying fortresses are 27-ton airborne battleships, each carrying a crew of 10. Since the Allies still have no fighter with sufficient range to escort their bombers, the B-17 is designed to provide its own defense. But despite the armor plating and weapons mounted front, rear, above, and below in a ball turret, the bombers still go down in alarming numbers. At a range of 175 miles, the Spitfire escorts are forced to withdraw due to lack of fuel. At 230 miles, the P-47 Thunderbolts must return to base. Like patient predators, the Luftwaffe fighters wait for the escorts to leave, then swoop in for the kill. The Germans now have a new one-year-old fighter, the Focke-Wulf 190. Designed by Kurt Tonk, chief designer of the Focke-Wulf Airworks, this 190 is an extraordinary advance in fighter design. Simple, light, yet strong and beautifully proportioned. Powered by a BMW radial engine, the FW-190s can turn at speeds which will tear the wings off lesser planes. With its greater speed, the 190 can break off combat with Spitfires and P-47 Thunderbolts, then return to fight again and again. To combat the 190, Hawker Aircraft races to develop the Typhoon, a successor to the Hurricane. But desperate for the new fighter, the RAF has to rush the Typhoon into combat before adequate testing is complete. During a raid on Dieppe, on the coast of France in August of 1942, a squadron of Typhoons diving out of the sun attack a formation of FW-190s. The Typhoons take out 3 of the German fighters. But the tail assemblies of 2 Typhoons rip away from their airframes. Neither pulls out of its dive. Soon after, all Typhoons are pulled out of combat. Dawn, August 17th, 1943. 147 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force's 4th Wing wait in the heavy English fog to take off. Their target? The Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg, Germany. Further inland and even deeper in the fog, 230 bombers of the 1st Bomb Wing wait to launch the other half of the Americans' daring 2-prong attack. Their target? The ball bearing factory at Schweinfurt. The ball bearings produced at Schweinfurt are the key to German aircraft and tank production. Regensburg is the key to the Luftwaffe's fighter capacity. Success depends on both bomber groups hitting their targets at the same time. But the continued dense fog keeps both formations on the ground well beyond their scheduled takeoff. Finally, by late morning, the Regensburg group is airborne. As they cross the Dutch coast, Focke-Wulf 190s rise to meet them in their Thunderbolt escort. Over Belgium, the 190s attack. The P-47s, now at the limit of their range, have to turn for home. There is nothing they can do. If they stay to fight, they'll run out of fuel somewhere over the North Sea. "11:50 hours. The Regensburg B-17s have been under sustained attack for an hour and a half. Now, with visibility perfect, the surviving bombers unload on the Messerschmitt plant. While the tattered remnants of the Regensburg group continue on to North Africa, the long-delayed Schweinfurt group enters German territory. The Luftwaffe fighters, rearmed and refueled, don't even wait for the P-47 escorts to withdraw. All the way to Schweinfurt and back, the exposed B-17s are savaged by wave after wave of fighters. Out of a force of 375, 60 B-17s have been shot down with their crews. Another 100 are severely damaged. Many so badly they will have to be scrapped. When the 8th Air Force mounts a second attack on Schweinfurt 2 months later, 20% of its unescorted bombers never make it back. The Allies cannot sustain such losses much longer. The need for a fighter capable of defending the B-17s all the way to their targets and back has become critical. The fate of the Allied effort hangs in the balance. Four years earlier, in late 1939, the British had wanted to purchase a large number of American Curtiss Wright fighters. But Curtiss's new plane, designated XP-46, is still months away from production. England needs planes now. In an effort to help the British acquire a fighter that's already flying, General Hap Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Force, increases production of the P-40 and shelves the XP-46. But the British know that to survive, they'll need a much better fighter than the aging P-40. They convinced Dutch Kindleberger and Leland Atwood of North American Aviation to produce a brand new design based on the test data for the XP-46. After some backroom negotiations, Kindleberger and Atwood acquire the data from Curtiss. Then they assign their chief designer, Edgar Schmood, to the task of building this new fighter. Ironically, only 6 years earlier, Schmood had worked for both Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf's Kurt Tank in Germany. On August 14, 1940, a mere 102 days after the contract is signed, a prototype of the new fighter, designated NA-73, is rolled out of the assembly shed. 2 months later, it takes to the skies for its first test flight. The new aircraft shows promise. At mid-altitudes, it reaches 400 miles per hour. Its acceleration in dives is excellent, and it handles beautifully. But it climbs poorly, has dangerously limited rear visibility, and above 18,000 feet, where the ME-109 is proving to be so deadly in the Battle of Britain, its performance deteriorates. A promising aircraft, but not the outstanding all-around fighter the British so desperately need. The RAF put it to work in reconnaissance, while the engineers experiment with turning it into a dive bomber. By now, the plane has a new name. Several, in fact. The Army Air Corps calls it the Apache. North American calls it the P-51. But the British, taking a cue from a popular song, saddle your blues to a wild Mustang and gallop your troubles away, call it the Mustang. Then in April 1942, Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, returns from a spin in a Mustang with a fresh idea. Just as an experiment, Harker suggests that the Mustang's Allison engine be replaced by a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same engine that powers the legendary Spitfire. The British Air Ministry is reluctant to waste time on a relatively untested American-built plane. Nevertheless, a Rolls-Royce Merlin is fitted to the Mustang's airframe. The results are stunning. The Merlin-powered Mustang P-51B soars at high altitude. And perhaps more importantly, its fuel efficiency dramatically improves. Long-range fuel tanks are fitted to its belly. Now, for the first time, an Allied fighter will have the range to escort American bombers deep into Germany. On December 1st, 1943, the first P-51B Merlin Mustangs are delivered to the U.S. 8th Air Force in England. Don Blakesley, leader of the 4th Fighter Group, hounds his commander to give his men the new P-51s. The brass argued that it takes a normal pilot weeks to get used to a new plane, time that cannot be spared from combat duty. But when Blakesley promises results in 24 hours, he gets the nod. Blakesley tells his men that they can learn to fly the new Mustangs on the 245-mile run to their first target, Kiel. This gives them only 40 minutes of flight time in the new bird before they have to engage in combat. But they get the job done. The Mustang performs flawlessly. Blakesley's and his men's daring gamble has paid off, putting the Mustang in combat service weeks sooner than expected. 3 months later, in March 1944, Mustangs escort American bombers all the way to Berlin and back. At last, the Allies have a long-range fighter, one that can outperform the best the Germans have. With its new capabilities, the P-51's battle plan is also revised. No longer is its mission simply to protect the bombers. After escorting them to their targets, P-51s are ordered to seek out targets of opportunity on the way home. They're free to go hunting. And they do, with deadly results. Fighter-escorted Allied bombers now ravage city after city, strategic target after target, deep in the German heartland. Long-range, high-speed Mustangs hunt and kill with diminishing opposition. The once proud predators have become the prey. As preparations for D-Day accelerate, the Luftwaffe is being destroyed on the ground and in the air. On April 5th, 1944, fighters from the 4th Fighter Wing penetrate to Berlin and Munich. Fighter ace Don Gentili in his P-51 personally takes out 5 Junkers 88s. On a single mission in October, Colonel Chuck Yeager, flying in the P-51D he named for his wife, Glamorous Glennis III, shoots down 5 German fighters. One of them is the Luftwaffe's deadly new jet, the MU-262. The Mustang had proven itself to be the premier fighter of World War II. By D-Day, June 6th, the Allies ruled the skies over Europe. On the eve of the invasion, Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower can tell his troops with confidence, any plane you see in the skies will be ours. By war's end, fighters of the 8th Air Force will have shot down over 5,200 enemy planes in the air, and another 4,200 on the ground. The mighty Luftwaffe had been defeated. Soon the Reich itself would lie in ruin. Not long after the German surrender, General Karl Spaatz, commander of U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, asked Hermann Goering when he realized that Germany had lost the war. Said Goering, "When I saw that first P-51 in the air over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." World War II was a turning point of aircraft experimentation. From the drawing boards of designers and engineers all over the world came an astonishing new generation of innovative designs. Like species in the wild, the best of these new creations triumphed. The weak faced extinction. In the early years of the war, the Luftwaffe's technical superiority ruled the skies over Europe. In the Pacific, the Zero reigned. But by matching and surpassing these weapons of war, by mastering new methods of testing, construction, and production, the Allies soon closed the gap and overtook the Axis. With new tools, strategy changed. And as strategists sought superiority in the skies above, engineers and designers on the ground rose to the challenge. But finally, it was on the wings of thousands of pilots that the race to rule the skies was run. This race may have begun on the drawing boards, but it was decided in combat.